Sometimes that is better.
Hey everybody, what's up? Killjoy Jake here, and instead of having friends, I have horror movies. So today we're talking all about Skinamarink, brand new crazy movie that just dropped this past Friday. Let's do a little review of it. Before we get into this review, of course, make sure to like this video and subscribe. That would make Jake here pretty dang happy. Another thing I want to say before we really get into the review is that I'm not going to do like a spoiler-free section like I usually do. I don't really know what I could say about this movie spoiler-free. The best thing I can do for a spoiler-free review is just to tell you that this movie is much more about capturing a feeling than it is an overall like plot or story or characters, whatever. It's much more about a certain feeling, which if I spoil that, I guess that's a spoiler. So spoilers ahead, you've been warned, go watch the movie then come back. Skinamarink is a 2022 Canadian experimental horror film written and directed by Kyle Edward Ball. This is Ball's feature directorial debut. He used to run a YouTube channel called BITESIZED NIGHTMARES that is pretty dang awesome and I highly recommend it. The film follows two children who wake up during the night to discover that they cannot find their father and that the windows, doors, and other objects in their house are disappearing. The movie also had a minuscule budget of only $15,000, which makes the film even more impressive in my mind. Also, if you were unable to see this movie, it will be on Shudder at a later date. That release date is yet to be put out, but it's coming soon. I really appreciate Skinamarink for being simple and not too overcomplicated. A lot of movies nowadays like to just keep throwing things into the mix to keep it interesting and original. Skinamarink doesn't have to do that to be original. The first two acts of Skinamarink perfectly encapsulate what it is like to be in a nightmare. It perfectly hones in on your childhood fears too, of like maybe you were like 6 years old and you're going downstairs at like 11 o'clock, you just want to get yourself a glass of apple juice. You know, when you're 6 years old, apple juice is like crack. It's awesome. Apple juice is good. You get yourself your glass of apple juice and your nice Batman cup and you're going upstairs and then suddenly you hear something in the other room and you think it's some kind of horrible entity that's chasing you up the stairs. This movie fleshes that out. It doesn't really show you it, but that's also kind of the point. I really appreciate the minimalist approach to this movie too. I think if you don't do that and we're like showing the characters, we're showing the entity and all that, I don't think it works. I've seen a lot of people who are understandably upset with this movie because it's just impossible to bridge an emotional relationship with some of these characters because you can't see them. I think the audio does that for me though. Like you hear the kids talking and it's like really sad and you feel really bad for them at one point because of some of the things that are coming out of their mouth. They're looking for their mom and dad. The audio does that. It's just not the usual approach to trying to build an emotional relationship with characters. That's why they call them experimental films. They're trying things out. And in a lot of ways, this movie does succeed. A lot of the imagery is super terrifying as well. Like the chair on the ceiling is very simple, but very creepy. The first time I watched this, I noticed that some of the cartoons were like relevant to what was going on with the actual plot. But on second watch, I'm like, oh wait, every single time it cuts to cartoons, that was super important. The thing that people won't like about this movie the most is that every single shot is pretty damn important, even if it's just like a ceiling or carpet or whatever. It's so minimalistic to the point where if you're not paying attention for like even a minute, you're gonna miss something because there's some bit of audio where it's like, oh, that was really important to the plot. Or like during this shot of just the ceiling, something is happening in the background, which was really crucial. After watching it twice now, I really like what they did in the first two acts. The scares are really well done. If it's like Kaylee's face being completely covered up with skin over her eyes and her mouth, that is a terrifying jump scare. That is the worst bit of nightmare fuel I may have ever seen in a movie, especially with the way it's presented and set up. Really well done. I think my favorite sequence in the movie though is with the parents on the bed and like they just disappear as Kaylee's looking around the room, and the way it ends with that just a little hand slap over the door. That is terrifying. The way that scene gave me this feeling of horrible dread was just so well done, and then ending it with that nice jump scare. It's a very professionally executed sequence, and knowing that this movie was only made for $15,000 is incredible. I know that this film is probably very cathartic for director Kyle Edward Ball too, who shot this in his childhood home. It's almost like showing us one of his own nightmares essentially, which is kind of my theory for what this movie's all about. The whole put the knife in your eye thing is just way too much for me. I was like, wow, not even seeing this, I'm still dreading the idea of what is probably happening. I also think as the movie progresses through the first two acts, you're getting more and more disturbing things happening that are either shown to you in little tiny glimpses or are happening off screen and you want to see them and you never see those things. Like the put the knife in your eye, that whole thing, that's terrifying. Great place to put that. I think everything perfectly elevates just like that throughout this movie. Until you get to the third act though. The third act I kind of had a bit of an issue with because I think it does turn a little nonsensical once you get to that point. The demon just starts straight up explaining everything to Kevin a little bit and it's a little much. Like right after the phone call scene, that's where the movie kind of loses me a little bit. There was a few things in the third act that I feel like kind of made this movie drag a little bit. Just the runtime in general, it should have been shorter. Like it shouldn't have been as long as it was. This could have been a cool 60 to 70 minutes and I think it would have been perfect. Movies don't have to be 90 minutes. I think everyone has this like preconceived notion that like Like, movies have to be this certain runtime. I like short movies. Host from 2020 is a great example of an hour-long movie that is fantastic. That is, as long as that movie needed to be, perfect runtime. My other thing about the end of this movie is I feel like there is a pretty consistent plot happening throughout the first 2 acts of this movie that you can follow if you're, if you watch this movie enough times. The third act, though, after 2 viewings, I'm still not understanding what's happening here. Like, maybe I'm just stupid. I'll admit to that. I'm too stupid for some movies, I'll be honest. Man, I'm trying to piece everything together and I'm just not getting what's going on in this third act. 572 days. What does that mean? Over a bunch of Legos on the ceiling. I'm trying to figure it out. I really am, but I got nothing there. The digital blood in that one scene, I have no idea if that's supposed to be Kevin's blood or not, because then we hear his voice in the very end shot. So I really don't know what's happening there. Like, I feel like that was just like a cool effect they decided to throw in. I don't know if that furthers the plot or if that was just supposed to be scary imagery. I don't know. Does that all kind of work with the whole nightmare aesthetic that they're going for? Yeah, it totally does, but I feel like everything was loosely connected in those first 2 acts. A lot of this third act does just feel like nightmarish imagery, where the first 2 acts felt like cohesive nightmare imagery, if that makes sense. Like, everything kind of flowed together as a whole plot up until this point. Now, even though there's like maybe like 10-15 minutes of this movie and like the third act, and I'm like, I don't really know if this all works. Maybe it does, and I'm just totally missing it. Once again, this is one that is very open to interpretation. But the ending shot of this movie is one of the most terrifying things I may have ever seen in a horror film. In the last shot, through the static and grain of the very stylized looking film that we're watching the whole time, you can kind of make out a face, and it is terrifying. Kevin repeatedly asks for its name at the end of this film, and then it just doesn't really give that answer. It just says, "You should go to sleep," or whatever. That to me perfectly hits on the ending of a nightmare, of like when you're about to wake up, you kind of remembered a face, like you're like, oh yeah, I can't really remember. Like, something scary was definitely happening, but I can't remember specifically what. This movie leaves you with that feeling on first watch. If you're trying to understand it a little more after, like, on a second watch, maybe not as much, but that first time, you're like, yeah, something horrifying was happening there, but I can't necessarily put my finger on what that was. It's perfect for that reason, but also if you're trying to look for a plot, you want to find that in this movie, that's why it's rewatchable. You can go back to this movie and find a plot. Like I said, that third act's a little rough in my opinion, but if you're trying to go back and you're looking for a plot this time around, or things that essentially feel cohesive, you're gonna find that on the second watch. For that reason though, I think Kyle and everybody else who worked on this film did an absolutely incredible job, and I am very happy with it. Also, for a $15,000 film, it's made almost $800,000, so that's a success in my book. I mean, listen, we're not talking no Paranormal Activity money here, but $15,000 turning into $800,000, that's pretty damn awesome. Skinamarink is a deeply unsettling movie that I kind of never want to watch again. Like, it definitely has rewatchability like I was talking about, but it's so uncomfortable and so dreadful, I almost don't want to watch it again. I probably will end up rewatching it though when it inevitably comes to Shudder, whenever that does happen, but as of right now, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it. The scares and dreadful sequences won me over with this film, regardless of if it's kind of sloppy in some other areas. What did you guys think about the very experimental Skinamarink? Leave me something about it in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching this brand new review video of Skinamarink. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more horror content in the future. Please consider supporting me on Patreon as well, or becoming a channel member by clicking that join button on my page. Thank you guys again for watching, and as always, don't forget to kill it out there, y'all.